Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting-edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And I promise you, we are so going to do it again tonight with one of my favorite topics. But before we get started and before Augie tells you about our amazing guest, I want to invite you to our YouTube community, our membership community. It's a place where it's a more intimate exchange between you and the other members and Augie and myself, where we share information that we don't necessarily put out on the mainstream YouTube channel. You know, we have a couple of experiences that we're not ready, to put out for public consumption, and we're probably gonna test it out, in the back office where you guys will be with us. So Mac will put the link in the chat box tonight, and it's also on our YouTube page. We would love to see you there. The first 10 people that enrolls gets one of Augie's books. Yay! So I don't think we have 10 people yet. So if you want a book, sign up tonight. And I don't even want to take up any more time because I'm so excited to get into the conversation. So Augie, will you please tell us about our guest?
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be so good. I've been looking forward to this one because we have Dr. Scott Tyler with us. And before I say anything else, I also want to mention his website where you can find some of the things that he has produced. Because a lot of people like to surf, the website at the same time they listen to the show and things. So that's why near-death-meditations.com. If you go there and now or later, if I was you, I would do it later because this you want to hear. Dr. Scott has... he was the president and the executive director of the Monroe Institute and also has been a trainer there since 1985. He is also the president now of the Expanded Awareness Institute, where he helps people understand near-death experiences. And those are the ones we call NDEs, and there are hordes of them. Probably millions of people around the world that have had these things over the millennia. And we still don't understand much of it, except for what has been gleaned from the universe by people like Dr. Scott and the people that he's been working with. Now, he is also an expert in the binaural beat technology to achieve and hold expanded state of consciousness. It is because of Scott and his crew that we today have a better understanding of the world around us. The one world we can't see, but it's there. And we want to hear more about that, specifically that world. But before we officially bring Scott on to the panel, I will recommend to the listeners that when you get to his website, and you should check out his CDs and his albums there. By listening to those, you may have some good and strange experiences. And I know because I've had some of those, and you're going to love it. That will be exploring the source, exploring the tunnel, maybe meeting your guides. And with that, enough from me. Welcome to the show, Dr. Scott.
Welcome. Thank you.
Agi, Nori, really a pleasure. I'm so glad that I could be with you tonight, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, thank you too.
Pleasure is all ours.
Absolutely.
Say, if I can just jump right in here, some of the most conservative figures that are out there that talk about how many people in the population have had an NDE, a near-death experience, 5%, and that figure is 25 years old. There hasn't been a big study lately, but considering all the medical advances we've had in the last 25 years, it wouldn't surprise me if we were closer to 8 to 10% of the population. So let's do the math. Today, the human population on planet Earth tipped to 8 billion people.
Wow.
I think that's a rather remarkable number. And if you take 5% of that, that means 400 million people that are on planet Earth today have had a near-death experience. So we don't even have to go into the past. This is just the folks that are alive and operating here in the physical universe. So
Wow.
that's a lot.
Remarkable. It is a lot. It's a lot more than I thought. And, Scott, you're one of the people on the planet that has had a shared death experience. So will you tell us about that? Tell us about your story.
I'd love to, Nori.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. This happened in 1981, and I was in love with a woman. Her name was Mary Frances Randall. And excuse me, Mary Frances and her son Nolan had been out sailing on Lake Washington in southern Minnesota. And on the way home, they were involved in a horrific car accident, and Mary Fran was killed outright. And Nolan, who just turned 7, he suffered a mortal head wound. Luckily, in southern Minnesota, we're really close to the Mayo Institute, and so they quick put him in the ambulance. They took them both over to Rochester, Minnesota, and they got some of the best care in the world, but it wasn't enough to save Nolan. And it took him 6 days to make his transition. That becomes important because Mary Fran was one of 9 kids. And because there was this 6-day time when Nolan was fighting for his life, that meant that all of the family had time to come from all over the United States to be there and hold vigil. So, this is, Mary Fran's brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins and friends and grandmother and grandfather, and that's just her side of the family. So there was a ton of people that converged on Rochester to be with Nolan and to help him through this time. So there were so many of us that what we decided to do was to divvy up our time. And so as it turns out, I had the shift from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on the morning of the 6th day that Nolan was in the hospital. And what that meant was that 2 of us would go into the room. It's a small hospital room and it's full of, monitors and stuff. And we would read him stories and tell him about what's going on and just generally try to keep his spirits up. Now, Nolan was in a coma. He never came out of the coma. But one of the things we know about being in a coma is that hearing is the last sense to go. So the nurses there were encouraging us to, read him stories. So we had his favorite book, and we, read him some of his favorite stories, and then we told him about what was going on with his uncles, because that now it's 3 a.m, right? So his uncles had gone throughout the Mayo Hospital and had stolen all of the cushions off the couches so they could put him on the floor of the waiting room, and and so all of us could be comfortable, because I mean,
Mhm.
it wasn't that big a waiting room, and there was 40 or 50 of us that were
Wow.
waiting around. So it was nice to be able to tell him stories and keep it light, and just
Mhm.
he has a
Mhm.
remarkable family, so why not?
It's lovely.
So it gets to be about 4 to 5 in the morning. We got 15 minutes to go, and I was partnered with Janny, which is Mary Fran's oldest sister, and she was a trained emergency room nurse. And at about 1:45, she walks to the end of the bed and she picks up the chart, and she looks at the chart, and then she looks at the myriad of monitors that are surrounding Nolan, and she just shook her head, and she held her hand out to me, and said, "Scott, it's time for us to say goodbye."
Mm.
So we pulled up a couple of chairs next to his head, and we told him that we were really proud of him, that he had been fighting so hard to stay alive and to be with us, with his family, but that if his mother should come, remembering that she died at the scene
Yes.
6 days
Yes.
before, but if Mary Fran should come and invite him to go with her, that would be the right thing to do.
Mm.
That should be, that he should feel that it was a good thing to go with his mother. And we told him that we loved him, and we said goodbye, and now it's 5 o'clock. And so Janie and I get up and we walk out the room, and the next shift comes in. Well, it isn't 45 minutes later when the nurse on the floor comes in, and she says, it's time. He's starting to go. And so this whole crowd, all files into Nolan's room, and as luck would have it, I'm at the end of the line. So by the time I get in there, it's already 4 or 5 deep around his bedside.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, well, that's crazy to be like number 6 deep. So I just sat on a windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie. And we just sit there, and, there's not a lot to do when you're holding vigil, other than, there's that monitor that goes beep, beep, and then beep, beep.
Mm.
And you just
Yeah.
watch the thing,
Yeah, we
and
know that one.
And so that heart monitor, we're watching it, and it gets slower and slower and slower. And finally, it flatlines with that really ominous tone that goes with it.
Yes.
And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping her son out of his body. And the two of them had this exquisite reunion, and it surprised me, because I got to feel what they were feeling.
Yes.
And they embraced each other, and were with each other. And then, more to my surprise, was that the two of them then turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us left and went to the light.
Wow.
And entering into the light was probably the most extraordinary experience that I've ever had. It is profound. It is a profound state of love. It is unconditional love. It it's exquisite, it's joyous, it's ecstatic, we don't really have very good words to describe how that feels. And then kind of when that initial shock kind of wears off a little bit, because all of a sudden you realize, I'm connected to these two people. It's so Mary Fran and I and Nolan, we're connected, and we can communicate with each other, and we can talk to each other. And so we do. And we have a chance to acknowledge our love and affection for each other. We get a chance to say goodbye. And then we get a chance to just be with one another for a while. And then it just felt complete. It just, there wasn't any like, goodbye, see you, Scott. No, it felt complete. And the two of them then turned and went further into the light. And then I came back to my physical body, knowing that I had been with them. But the other thing is, I was also connected to everything else in the universe.
Yes.
And it was this experience of unity with Mary Fran and Nolan, but with every human and with everything. I mean, it's really quite overwhelming when it happens, and I still don't have good words for it. But so that's part A of the story. So I thought I'd like do a little time out here just to make sure if you had any questions up till
I
now.
do. I have a question. So tell me again, what was your state of mind when that happened? Were you napping or meditating or?
That's a really good question, because I'm sitting there on this windowsill, so there's no napping, because you're
Yes, right.
it's uncomfortable, but at least I'm sort of sitting down. And I would say that I was in a meditative state, because I don't know, I think it was probably 45 minutes that we were with Nolan watching the monitor.
Yes.
And so there's that's the only thing that's happening in the room. Everybody's just standing there watching this monitor get slower and slower. So yeah, I was fully conscious and in the room, but sort of kind of zoned out.
Yes.
Sort of kind of.
That will make
Yes.
perfect sense to Nori, because she was an emergency room nurse.
Aha,
Yeah.
there you go.
I was a critical care nurse. Yeah. So,
Oh,
this was
you know this drill.
back
Why am I
memories.
telling you this story?
Well, no, I love this story. I love this story. It's
Oh,
beautiful.
that was.
I'll just throw a quick story in, then we'll go on. We had a young woman who came into the burn trauma unit. She was a nail tech. She owned her own salon and was keeping acetone inside, which she wasn't supposed to do. Somebody lit a match. She was burned like 90% of her body. Long story short, she hung around for several weeks. She had a 6-month-old baby. And when the heart rate began going low, the baby was in the nurse's lounge, and all the nurses are, hugging the baby, rocking the baby. The minute mom flatlined, the baby in the nurse's lounge began screaming.
Yeah.
It was so pivotal in my life to see how that connection worked, and anyway, and this is just adding a bit more light to it. So thank you. So,
but it's the truth though, because when you think of a mother who is reconnecting with her son,
yes,
and literally scooping him up out of his physical body, that bond that happens between mother and child, I mean, it's extraordinary. And
yes,
I got to be there.
Yeah.
Really there, really there.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Aw, that's so beautiful.
So part B of the story then is that as I'm up in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, and we're connecting and we're communicating with each other, I am also in the room, physically in the room with all of the other relatives. And I know this because it was like the light and love of the universe was inside my body and trying to break out. And I know that my face was, it was just joyous. It was ecstasy. It was, it's like I touched the love of the universe. And because I was present in the room, I also knew that the expression on my face was totally inappropriate because, you know, Nolan had just passed and Mary Fran had died 6 days before, and here I am, and I'm grinning. You know, and so the only thing I could think of to do was to cover my face with my hands and just wait. Because if anybody had looked at me, they would have, or they could have, let's put it this way, misunderstood it.
Yeah.
And that would have been a bad thing. Just,
Yeah.
no, that shouldn't have happened. So I covered my face with my hands and I just waited. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. Now I do. I have a word for it. I didn't then. It's called bilocation. I was with Mary Fran and Nolan in the light, fully present with them, and I was in my physical body, fully present with all of the other grieving relatives that were in the room. Only I was had my face covered. So it was so it was totally outside of my experience. I mean, I was raised in the mainline Presbyterian church. And let's just say that the lexicon of the Presbyterian church doesn't include watching people come across the veil and being in two locations and being able to communicate with them when they're, you know, not in their body anymore. I mean, all of the stuff is like, I never heard of it. It was just really outside of who I was.
Were you aware that you were there while you were there?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was totally with them in the light, and I was totally with the grieving relatives in the room. So, and when I look back on it, it didn't seem strange.
Wow.
It felt normal that I could do that.
Yes.
And
being in the light, did you also see others except for those two, or was it just the three of you?
that's a really good question, Augie. Because I usually don't tell this part of the story, but as long as you asked.
Please do.
I
think you had another experience.
So I do. I have another experience. It goes like this. So fast forward 15 years, and I have decided to attend the University of Minnesota. I'm sorry, the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. It's Minnesota's largest private university. And I'm earning my doctorate, and I'm studying people who've had near-death experiences. And because the women in Mary Fran's family, most of them were in healthcare in one form or another, I, emailed them all and said, I'm doing this study, and do you know anybody I can talk to? Because I need people to tell me their stories so I can do my research. And one of them, who has asked to remain anonymous, so I'm going to call her the sister. One of the sisters wrote me back and said, well, Scott, I had a near-death experience and I'd love to tell you about it. So we got together, and her NDE is pretty straightforward. She was visiting her folks. She'd taken a new medication and had laid down for a nap, had an adverse reaction to the medication. And the next thing that she knows is that she's floating in this world of gray. and out of the gray came Mary Fran. And the two of them were really close. And so Mary Fran walked right up to her, put her hands on her hips, stuck out her finger and said, "You got to go back, and you got to go back now."
Wow.
And so the sister, looking at her, hasn't seen her for 15 years. It says, "Well, really nice to see you too, Mary Fran." And Mary Fran not having any of it. She puts her hands back on her hips and she yells at her, "You've got to go back and go back now." And it so startled the sister that she immediately, boom, went back into her physical body, opened her eyes. And when she did, what she saw was an EMT getting up, and he turned away and he was talking to his buddy. And he says, "I've done everything I know how to do. We've lost her." The
Wow.
other EMT, of course, is standing there looking down, sees the sister, opens her eyes, and it goes, "Bah!" And, they jump on it. They get her all fixed up, take her to the hospital, and she's just fine. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow.
So that's the story of
Yeah.
the sister. And so we're done with the interview. I turn off my tape recorder and I'm packing things up. And all of a sudden it occurs to me. And I went, when Nolan made his transition, something really unusual happened to me. I wondered if anything unusual happened to you when he left his physical body for the last time. And the sister just looked at me and her eyes got like as big as saucers. And she goes, and I went, "Oh, before you say anything," and I turned back the tape recorder back on again. I said, "Tell you what, you tell me your story first, then I'll tell you mine and we'll compare notes." This is what she told me. She said, "I remember very well." She says, "I was standing next to Nolan. I was bedside and I was on the opposite side of the room. So I could see you sitting on the windowsill on the other side of the room. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. The two of them had this exquisite reunion that I was able to participate in. And then they came to me, embraced me, and the three of us went to the light. She used the exact same words that I just used in telling you that story. The exact same words. She told them in the exact same order.
Wow.
The only difference in our stories was that Mary Fran and Nolan took me to the light, and simultaneously or at a different time, I'm not really sure, it works oddly in the non-physical universe, but Mary Fran and Nolan had embraced the sister and taken her to the light. So maybe there was 4 of us. I'm not exactly sure, but
Wow.
in that instant, if I had any doubts about what had happened to me, like, I don't know, maybe I was grief stricken or
Yes.
my brain didn't have enough blood in it for the moment or
Right.
whatever. I mean,
Right.
make up your story.
Mhm.
But because we experienced the exact same thing happening at exactly the same time, it was like, perfect. I get it. I get it. I get it. And so, any of that self-doubt just evaporated. And I was, from then on, it's like 100%. I know that this happened and I know it happened in exactly the way. And everything that the three of us communicated with each other, it's all real. It's all real.
Mm.
It's
Well, that
beautiful.
could make
That's
sense.
kind of a cool,
since-
that's kind of a cool thing, huh? A corroborated shared
Yeah.
death experience.
It's extremely
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And both of you going there with the two of them at maybe at different times, because in that arena, time is not linear as necessarily here. You have
Yep.
past, present, and future at the same time, only that you can latch on to something and bring it out, so you can still experience it as linear, but it could be happening at the same time. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and our language is constructed around linear.
Yeah.
And and I use
The-
when I say that I spoke with Mary Fran and Nolan, it wasn't using English words. It's not like we're talking right now. It was a telepathic communication, which is so much better than English words, because not only do you get the concepts that are being happened, but all the nuances and all of the emotion, and I mean, all that information is there telepathically, and you just share it.
Yes.
It's not like a conversation; it's more like you share it. So it's an exquisite form of communication. It's so much better than the language that we have here on Earth. But
you probably used what I'm calling the spiritual language, and you spoke in the form of emotions and principles and music and color and love.
Yeah.
And within that, you have the understanding of details that bring out the actual core of the language.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I've had, I've described it as the original language. Whatever it is that we speak over there on the other side, that's telepathic, that allows you to understand everybody and everything. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
That's a good
So,
call.
I was wondering how you get to go. Do they choose you, or is it just like a harmonic energy thing that makes it happen?
Yeah, actually, we do know now. Thank you,
Yeah.
William Peters, and his book At Heaven's Door. So, William, you owe me something for that plug there. It's a really good book. But what he talks about in there is that there are 3 things that are required for that a shared death experience to take place. One is that there's a heart connection. And well, there certainly was, between Mary Fran and I was just getting to know Nolan, and we had bonded. But the part that's important about Nolan is that Mary Fran was a single mom, and the biological father had disavowed any knowledge of his actions and had chosen not to support them or be in their life in any way. And so she chose to not tell Nolan who the biological father was. So when I showed up onto the scene, it was natural for us to bond. I mean, just face it. I mean, he was 6 years old, and he wanted to have a dad just like every other 6-year-old kid in elementary school. And so, yeah, we had a special connection. Mary Fran and I had a special connection. So certainly there's that heart connection. The second thing that's required is that you're open and receptive. And as you pointed out earlier, I was kind of in this meditative state because all I've been doing for 45 minutes is watching the heart monitor.
Yes.
And so, I wasn't otherwise engaged in conversation or grieving or whatever. I was just sitting there. So I was open and receptive. And the invitation needs to come from them to me. It doesn't work the other way around. I mean, I can't will myself to go with them.
Yes.
And what I now understand, having studied this for a while, it would have required me to instantaneously raise my vibratory level. And that's something I wasn't trained in at that time. And I didn't even know about it. But when you're on the other side, it's easier for you to lower your vibratory level to match mine. And so that's how the invitation happens. They come, lower their vibratory level to match mine, and then I have the ability to go with them as
Love that. Wow.
Hmm.
so.
How does this experience relate to maybe out of body experiences, which is fairly simple actually to learn when you can just walk out of your body and look back and there you're still sitting in the chair, and then you can go places and do things. How are they somewhat similar, or what are the similarities, if there are any?
Yeah, there certainly are. We know that I would say it's almost more like remote viewing,
Mm.
where you're able to project your consciousness and still be, physically present. Like remote viewers will look at what's happening in another room or another state somewhere, and they're drawing pictures, or they're using a voice recorder or whatever they use to document their experience. So it's more like that. So you're in your physical body, and yet you're able to project your consciousness, which is what happened. I was able, my consciousness was projected into the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, and I'm still sitting on the windowsill trying to keep my balance. So that's a great question, because it's not, at least what happened to me. When we talk about out of body experiences, usually there's that 100% shift between
Yes.
where your consciousness resides. Is it in your physical body, or is it in your non-physical body? And it can totally be in the non-physical. That's typically how that works, but in my case, it was shared.
Yeah.
And
And you can have, I've done some reading on this, and you can very easily have 3 locations of consciousness. And I've read about, the masters of the East who were able to maintain 6 different consciousnesses. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
So it just means that we are not limited by what we think we are.
Yeah.
We can do extraordinary things.
From what I've heard also is that most of these near-death experiences, they have a really positive experience with it. They encounter the light, or they may not encounter the light, but they meet some dead family members out there and have a wonderful experience. And then they're told, sorry, can't come here, you got to go back. And then there are this really small percentage, maybe not even 1%, but there is a few that does not have a good experience. They
Yep.
find themselves in darkness and don't know what's going on or something. Did you ever run
Yeah.
into anything like that?
Yeah, I know. That's a really interesting subject for me. And it's the primary difference between a near-death experience and a shared death experience. Well, no, it's this. Well, anyway, there are two main ones. The first one's really obvious. In a near-death experience, most of the time, your physical body encounters such trauma that it dies. Then your non-physical body leaves, has an adventure, and then comes back to the physical body. So as with my story, there's no physical trauma. I mean, I'm sitting on a windowsill. I'm grieving, but there's nothing happened to my physical body. So, that's the main difference. And the other main difference is that William Peters was able to show that out of the 800 people that he interviewed, 100%, all of them, without exception, went to a benevolent afterlife.
wow.
Isn't that interesting? 100%. Now,
Yeah.
with near-death experiencers, it's not that way. And it depends on the study, whether it's 5% or 19%. There's a bunch of studies out there about what they call less than positive. experience, near-death experiences. And at least in my reading of it, the vast majority are those negative experiences revolve around what I like, what I like to call the 2x4 method of counseling, which is essentially, you know, the beings in the afterlife just whack,
Yeah.
hit you alongside the head and go, dude, you have not been paying attention. We have been trying to tell you that you are not living the life that you were supposed to be living. You've got to straighten up and fly right. And, they have this argument or they yell at them or whatever. And it so shocks and surprises people that they go, oh my God, so when they come back to their physical life, they can see how they need to change their life in order to live the life that's intended. And then the other group, and I find this really interesting too. So Joseph Campbell, remember him?
Absolutely.
He wrote about myths, and one of them that he wrote about was the hero's journey,
Yes.
and about how we leave our tribe and get called and gather friends and have some sort of trial, and then we come back to the tribe again, tell the story. So anyway, there's this circular path that people on the hero's journey take, and in the middle of it, they encounter a trial or tribulations. Sometimes those negative experiences are people's trials. And it's up to them when they encounter this drooling mad dog, think of that 3-headed dog that was, Harry Potter, guarding the trap door. It's all ugly. And
Yeah. Yes.
well, that'd be scary. Your job, Mr. newly non-physical body person, is to figure out how to get around that dog or to tame the dog or something. Anyway, so that's number 2, is this idea that there's something that you need to conquer that will strengthen who you are as a soul. And this is your task. And the third thing is, I just don't know. Sometimes I read stories about people who had near-death experiences and they haven't gone well. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So I know I don't have the right perspective, because,
I
I'm
think
not
there
God,
is, there
So-
may be something in the mix of that where someone that has absolutely no spiritual knowledge, they are totally in belief that when I die, the lights go out and there's nothing after. Boy, they're going to be surprised, and they're going to look around and say, wait a minute, now what do I do?
Now what do
And
I
they
do?
get caught in darkness. And that's what a lot of the disembodied spirits outside of the physical in the astral worlds, they are there. It's just stupid folks, more or less. And they just
Well,
don't know anything. Maybe that's it.
Oh, that is so true. Because what happens in a near-death experience is that, you're riding your bike down the side of the highway, boom, 1 second you're on your bike, and the next second you've been squished and poof. You are now in the non-physical world. There's been hardly any transition, and you don't know what's going on. And this place is run by a whole bunch of different rules than it was back in the physical. And so what happens is that you find that the near-death experience is happening to them. They aren't a co-creator. It's just like they're buffeted around and they don't really know what to do. So that's why, I teach people how to go to the same places as near-death experiencers, only using meditation. And, when you use meditation, it allows us to have, what you're going to encounter ahead of time. You have the time to experiment and to get the hang of what it is you're supposed to do in this non-physical universe. And it's not a surprise. You're in control. You have guides to help you. I mean, it's a whole different experience than all of a sudden being thrust into it and you didn't know what's happening. And in particular, there are 3 different kinds of light that people encounter when they have a near-death experience. One of them we see all the time on television. It's the white light. It's what happened to Harry Potter. Remember, he went up to King's Cross Station and he's in this world of gray and he meets Dumbledore and he has conversations and he discovers things that he couldn't possibly have known on Earth. And, you know, it's straight out of NDE 101. It's a beautiful description of a near-death experience in the white light. One of the cool things about the white light is, you know, usually it's bright and you enter into it. And the people that I have talked to that were curious people, some of them have actually looked around behind them because there's this bright light in front of them. And when they looked around behind them, they saw that there was no shadow. Isn't that interesting? There
Very
was no
interesting.
shadow, which meant that they weren't apart from the light. They had merged with the light. So the light and they weren't different anymore. So it's a lovely little side benefit of being in the white
beautiful.
light. The second one is black light, where you are going to the source of all creation. You know, if you're a Genesis 2 fan, and I can't quote it very well, but you know, before there was physical form, there was the void and it was dark and deep. And all things arose, all material things arose from that void that the Bible talked about. That's there. And people go to that dark space, and those that aren't weirded out by it are able to sit in that space. And what they discover is that it is filled with unconditional love. And very often when people describe it, they'll cross their hands and they'll kind of rock back and forth and they'll just talk about being loved and held. And they use the words like, this is the womb of God. All things are birthed from this area of source, this area of the black light. So it's a beautiful, exquisite place to be. The last light that people encounter is clear light. And that's actually what happened to me. And it's where the light begins to emanate from everything. So I've got like this microphone here, and all of a sudden this microphone would be exuding its own light, and the table that I'm at is exuding its own light, and I am exuding the light, you know, and Augie and Nori, you're exuding your own light, and all of a sudden you begin to realize that everything in the universe is created out of the same light. And that what we are individual manifestations of that light. And it's an extraordinary thing to realize that, yeah, you know, I'm part of this unity universe, the love and oneness that is our universe. And so anyway, those are the 3 different kinds of light. And it doesn't surprise me that people would be disoriented if all of a sudden you're riding your bicycle down the highway and the next second you find yourself floating in this black space and you go like, well, now what?
Exactly.
I've run into something else too, and that is that people deeply embedded in Western religions, you run into them everywhere. And if I had this happen when I start talking about meditation, I mean, they cross themselves. They don't want nothing to do with me anymore because in the good book, it says that don't meditate because that's where Satan will get you or something similar. So what do you tell them?
Well,
Except that in the Bible, it does say, be still.
it says be still. Well, there you
Yeah.
go. Talk about the black light. That is the definition of black light. The Christian tradition has a long history of meditation. I mean, look at all the way back through the Middle Ages and before, all the way back to the Gnostics, and they all had periods of contemplation and meditation. And it's like, be still and know that I am there. That
Yes.
you can't. And so it's not incumbent. It's part of the tradition that I grew up in. And some folks have taken it to be fearful that that you are able to receive messages from the divine spirit. And it's too bad because, one of the things we taught at the Monroe Institute is that, and I believe this to be true, that intention is what runs this universe.
Yes.
And we can intend to be protected against the three-headed dogs or somebody who would want to mislead us for whatever reason. And those intentions will protect us absolutely. We put them out there, boom, it's done. End of statement, full stop. We are incredibly powerful beings in our multidimensional state. And so once we learn, how to say, this is what the kind of experience I would like to have, and this is the kind of people I want looking over me, and only bring to me those experiences that would be good for me right now, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's all different kinds of affirmations that you can use when you go into a meditative state to calm your mind and give yourself protection. So it's out there, Augie. I get it. Some people, buy that hook, line, and sinker because it's, but for me, the problem is that it's fear-based and not love-based. When you start to look at love-based answers, the equation entirely changes. And there we go. You can explore the non-physical universe at will and have great results.
So I keep going back to you sitting on the windowsill.
Yes.
And the monitor. And, the cadence of the monitor slowly lowering. You were in a hypnotic state, right?
I was, I believe that could be true.
Yeah.
Or I was at least in such a, maybe a hypnagogic state.
Wow. Wow.
Just one that was free from distraction.
Yes.
And I was just with my emotions.
Beautiful.
I'm sitting there watching this beautiful boy leave. And so I'm already connected to him.
Yes.
Because of, that.
Have you had any drive-bys from them? Have they come to visit you? Yeah, I'm just trying to lighten it up.
May I use that? That's great. I love
that. Please. I mean, have they stopped in to say hi or anything?
Oh, yeah. It's so one of the consequences of having a near-death experience or a shared death experience is that you become intensely curious, especially about all things spiritual. And I knew, Nori, that if I had been in that state once, I could do it again. I just had to figure out how. And making a long story short, I went to all these ancient religious sites on the planet. I went to the Sphinx and Machu Picchu and Stonehenge and
Wow.
blah, 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 the Oracle of Delphi. And,
Wow.
looking for that extra little bit of juju that might be in that spice to kind of, propel me into the non-physical universe. More cathedrals than you could shake a stick at. Crickets. Just crickets.
Wow.
Nothing happened for me. Just
Mhm.
nothing. And, so then I started other paths, meditation paths with TM, and I studied with shamans in North and South America and Japan. And that was a little better, but it really wasn't until I found the Monroe Institute that has a terrific technology that allows you to enter into and hold expanded states of awareness. So to get back to your question, once I found Monroe and was able to enter into expanded states of awareness, Mary Fran was right there.
Wow.
And so in a meditative state, I could contact her all the time. And shortly thereafter, it was Nolan. So the two of them showed up right away. Now, the interesting thing, because, if you did the math, this was 41 years ago. So Mary Fran has come in and out of my life. Sometimes she'll be present and we'll talk, but sometimes she's just not around. I mean, just not around.
Yeah.
And for years it would be like that. Nolan, on the other hand, always around. He's like
Aw.
right there. He's like right there.
Aw.
And so we have an ongoing relationship. And so for Nolan and I, we have this agreement, and it goes like this. Whenever I want to talk to him, I imagine this particular park bench. It looks like those park benches you see in Central Park, New York. It's got kind of the little
Yes.
curlicues on the end
Yes.
with the wood slats. Anyway, so there's this park bench. It's on a gravel path outside, on a curved gravel path where there's grass in front of you, flowers. It's really lovely. Anyway, so I will picture that in my mind, and I'll go sit on the bench, and poof, there's Nolan. Now, the cool thing is, sometimes I have an agenda, sometimes he has an agenda. And if he's the one having the agenda, he will show up to me at what age it's appropriate. So if we're just like kind of going to mess around in the park, he could be 7 years old like he was when he left. But I've had really interesting conversations with him as a young man. And now, he would be in his 40s, be 47. And so depending upon what our conversation is going to be about, he'll show up in different ages and present himself to me, with different clothes and, it's
That's fun.
whatever is age appropriate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. I love that. I love that.
How can these discs that the CDs that you have put together, talk a little bit about that, how that can help people reach this altered state of awareness?
Sure. The technology that Bob Monroe, the founder of the Monroe Institute, he got famous because he was the first one to write about, from a Western perspective, write about out-of-body experiences. And people got so interested in what it is that he was writing about, he had to figure out a way to teach them. And so he found this old technology that was discovered back in the 1880s called binaural beats. And you put one beat into one ear and a slightly different beat into the other ear, say like 100 and 104. And a couple of things happen simultaneously that make this extraordinary. First off is that the brain, it's got two different signals and it's trying to equalize the two, and it can't because they're inherently different, especially if you're using headphones. And so what the brain does is it sets up a third tone, the difference between the two, which would be in our case 4. And then the second thing happens is that the brain starts to resonate at that 4, at that frequency of 4.
Mm.
And if we were going to do that right now, all three of us would be like instantly asleep, because that's a vibration of deep sleep.
Wow.
Bob's genius was that he started to mix them. And he said, what happens if we have a 12 and a 4? And because 12 we know is mind awake, 4 is body asleep. So what happens when you put the two of them together? That was his very first state of expanded awareness. And it's the one he did all of his out of body work in, and it's affectionately known at the Monroe Institute as mind awake, body asleep, or focus 10. He liked he liked numbers because there wasn't any cultural baggage with them.
Yes.
Anyway, so all of a sudden, you now, through the use of sound, can have your brain vibrate at a very particular rate. And the third thing that happens is so cool is that the brain then starts to not act as two independent hemispheres. It starts to act as one unit.
Mhm.
So you have both the linear side and the abstract side of the brain that are working together. And so now all of a sudden you have the full power of the brain that's available as you're exploring the non-physical universe.
That's
So
huge.
it's a lovely thing. And because you can put it on a CD, you can make it last for 40 minutes.
Wow.
So, in normal life, when you enter into these expanded states of awareness, usually they're pretty quick. You go in and you go out, and you don't even realize it sometimes.
Right.
But here, it's sustained. And now, having all of these years, we know that, say, when you lift out of your physical body, there very often is an escort to take you to the light. Well,
Yep.
that is a guide. And these guides tend to show up at a particular vibratory level. And so you can create that with the tones. The tunnel, that's at a different vibratory rate. That place where it's all heart, or the
Yes.
black light, or the white light, they're at different vibratory levels. That place where you go and have the reunion with the dead relatives, which is way fun, by the way,
Yes.
or the life review. All of these are at different vibratory levels. We found these out now by playing around. And so, the common population doesn't have to figure this out. It's right there in the CD, and they're like $22. I mean, it's
So
like,
how can people find you or hear more from you and find this, get the CDs for themselves?
just that wonderful website that Augie was so
Perfect.
kind to put out there at the beginning, neardeathmeditations.com. That's the place.
Wonderful.
It's got the CDs, it's got the retreats, it's got the workshops, it's got some really nice resources, got the link to the podcast. So it's a
Perfect.
one-stop shop for all
I love
things
it.
NDE and SDE.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So our time is just about up. And Augie, do you
Oh
want
no,
to ask?
say it's not so.
I know. I know. I've enjoyed this so much. Do you want to ask your famous question, Augie?
Yes, and before I do that, actually, I tell you, I know enough about these binaural beats to say that go to the website, have a really close look at it, and try it out, because there is magic in there. And I'm using magic in relative terms here, because this is science, and it works. When you're using the simplified science that he explained to you, things happen. You're able to have experiences. And I know because I've had it. So just try it out. And now for my favorite question of all things.
I wish I'd been prepared.
No, this is for you. It's going to be easy.
Okay.
Here goes.
I'm ready.
If you could talk to the whole world and the world was listening, what would you tell them?
I would say that you were alive before you were put into a body, that this body that we have right now, we exist only temporarily. It's a wonderful thing to be in the physical body. And when it's used up, it's worn out, it's too old, we'll go back home. We are more than our physical bodies, and we existed before, we existed after, and that home is consists of nothing but love.
Ah,
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary place, and that you are loved unconditionally, and you have nothing to fear.
that's beautiful.
It's a beautiful, wonderful experience, and your transition will be glorious.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Absolutely.
Thank you
And
for that.
yeah, and you know, your body is kind of like a car. You know, cars get older and they get rusty and then they quit working and then you throw them away and you go home. And then if you decide to, you can come back and get a new car.
You can get a new car.
Dr. Taylor, thank you so much. It's
Thank you
just
very much for being with us.
such a pleasure. So informative and enlightening
Yeah,
and satisfying on so many levels. Thank you.
thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
And thank you, Nori. Thank you, Augie, for great questions. You guys have been wonderful hosts.
Thanks.
And in the words of Spock, live long and prosper.
Long and prosperous.
Good night. Have you heard? Have you heard that Broadcast Team Alpha is changing? Now, we're not closing down, quite the contrary. We're going to continue bringing you the great programming that we've been bringing you every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. And of course, we're going to continue with our mastermind. But it's a different level of interaction and content. It's a membership level that we're bringing to you. Augie?
Yes, Augie here. Yeah, this is going to be good. It's a different forum, more like a membership type of thing, and where we will be listening to you. What do you want to hear and see? You'll also have more personal information about us. What do we do? And exclusive interviews for you only. And Nori, what else?
That's true. We're going to be bringing you content that's not available to the open market. We actually have a research team that's going to be researching, for lack of a better word, researching the content that you want to hear, the things that are important to you. We're going to be bringing you the best of what we do, the best of our gifts, the best of our talents, how to transform your life, how to have your best life, how to have your best health, and of course, you know, the things that you love regarding the quantum universe. It's all coming to you in a more intimate fashion in our membership program. Just click on the link on our YouTube page and join us. It's going to be amazing. Click the link. We'll see you there.